we begin a new study in Proverbs, Proverbs 1. This is a great lesson for all of us on the difference between knowledge and wisdom. We can be puffed up with knowledge, but it's no good unless we can apply that knowledge with wisdom. And that wisdom is a moral term that allows us not just to have knowledge, but this idea of being able to choose the right path, choose the right decision, choose the right people to listen to for advice. And this is what Solomon is teaching us in Proverbs. He's teaching us that we should understand the difference between knowledge and wisdom and the moral consequences of not listening to sound advice. And so, first of all, to understand, there is in the Greek a difference between the term instruction, discipline, knowledge, and wisdom. Instruction or knowledge is to know a skill, usually, or to know some kind of factual information. The Hebrew word for that is da'it. And so it is important to know that it's something we have to have as sort of an ability to discern what is important, what we need to know. The idea of instruction is a discipline that goes further in terms of listening to the sound advice of one who is more experienced, one who has a ability to have rebuking if we're doing the wrong thing, one who has the sense of knowing that we have to have correction and sometimes even chastising us. It's better to have friends that will tell you the truth rather than make you flattered. And then this word for instruction is muzkah in Hebrew, and it actually can mean to chasten somebody, to actually punish somebody if they are way out of line. But it's all for a warning. And then the third area is this sense of wisdom, and that is in Hebrew hakmah, which means having a skill of applying this knowledge wisely. They have to have a sense of moral aptitude to understand this knowledge. So if we look at the beginnings of Proverbs, we see that that's the purpose of Solomon is to teach wisdom because he has gone through his own experiences. He has gone through his experiences of making the wrong decisions. And he wants to straighten out people, especially his son, to follow him. And not to make the same mistakes. We never learn from history, do we? And so he's giving you this essential proposition of the essence of the philosophy that has to be followed, and that is wisdom. And so we look at verse 7, and he says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Okay, well, when I grew up in the synagogue, the rabbis would always put the fear of the Lord upon me, but they weren't giving me the real definition of what fear means here. The fear is not this kind of being afraid of God. You see, we go all the way back to Zeus hurling thunderbolts at people to punish them. And so the fear is, in the Hebraic sense here, an awesome reverence for the Lord. And that's the beginning of knowledge. In other words, you have to open up yourself to God's wisdom before you have wisdom. And so it's a reverential attitude this kind of awesomeness when your heart is set right and it observes your inclination to listen to God. This word is a fear of reverence, yirah in Hebrew. It's a substantive means of reverence or holy fear. Okay, so why? Because fools, fools will despise wisdom and instruction. And so only a fool says in his heart, there is no God. So that first step, you have to have the listening, the instruction from God. And it's sometimes given through godly people. So he says in verse 8, hear, my son, then your father's instruction. And so I think there's a double meaning to that. You listen to your parents' instruction, honor thy father and mother, but you also are listening to your Father in heaven, his instruction. Do not forsake your mother's teaching. Okay? So again, this sense of the parent obligation is there, but notice that in the Hebraic school of learning, the mother was responsible for homeschooling the child up to 10 years old. And then the child would be under the guidance of the father to learn the Torah and to go to Hebrew school with the rabbi in order to achieve a bar mitzvah by 13 years old. And so all those are part of Jesus's own teaching, his own learning. And so he's expressing the same Jewish educational system. So again, we have this double meaning of father listening to God, and also a double meaning of mother, because mother represents in Hebrew the people of the land of Israel. And so it's really interesting to know Israel and has its own fatherland, but it's also a motherland. And so this whole idea of the terms are more than this. It's like a sense of understanding the teachings of your parent, also other people that can teach you well, and also more important than anything, the wisdom of God being coming from above. And so in verse 9, they are a graceful wreath to your head, ornaments about your neck. Again, this idea of a wreath and ornaments are seen as prizes. They are seen as honors. Even the Greeks knew that because they wore a victory wreath or they had a medal. We even see my friend Orville Rogers used to show us his medals for running races. And so his whole idea is that we have these honors to follow. But again, there's always the warning. Remember, I said that part of this discipline is listening to instruction. It's a warning. My son, if sinners entice you in verse 10, do not consent. If they say, hey, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without cause. What in the world's going on there in verses 10 and 11? He says, hey, don't follow the gang. Don't follow the crowd, the wrong crowd. Don't follow these people who want to what? Have self-gain. They lie in wait for blood. Okay? And so there's a murderous attitude here. People are willing to not only take your property, but also take your life. We see this lately with the protests going on. That is, the crowd mob psychology takes over, And so it's not this wisdom, it's not this kind of rational wisdom or godly character that's going to see you through those kinds of enticements. That is a way of murdering the self, murdering the soul. And so this whole idea of waiting for blood, we can see this as Christians because why? The blood of Christ covers us. The blood of Christ covers us in his righteousness. It's not this sense of shedding blood as Cain and Abel did. Let us ambush the innocent without cause. Okay, so again, they're rebels without a cause. If you're going to have peaceful protests, yeah, you have a cause. But when you start creating violence, start creating damage to property, damage to people, actually risking their lives, then you are a murderer. You're without cause. You're what I call the rebel without a cause. And so he says in verse 12, let us swallow them alive like Sheol. Okay. Sheol is a what? Place of death. It's the cemetery where you throw the dead bodies. Okay. It's the first step to unhallowed ground being hell. And so even whole as these will go down into the pit. In verse 13, we'll find all kinds of precious wealth and we'll fill our houses with spoil if we follow and throw in our lot in verse 14 with these unholy people who are not listening to God's will and to his advice. So we shall have then one purse, a gathering of the booty. And so this whole idea was the idea of plundering all you can, taking people's possessions, damaging their property, stealing, breaking in, all these evil criminal acts which are against our Judeo-Christian foundation of the law. Okay? All those things are part of this gang mentality, this what I call the crowd, what Kierkegaard calls the crowd, the sense of not acting upon one's personal integrity, but being influenced by a peer group that doesn't have your heart at hand, but only self-aggrandizement. So the warning is in verse 15, don't walk in this way. Don't hang out with the wrong people. Keep your feet from their path. For their feet, in verse 16, run to evil. They hasten to shed blood. And in verse 17, indeed, it's just useless to spread this baited net in the sight of any bird. So here, Solomon's giving him an analogy of a bird that is flying over and is smarter than a human being because the bird can see you set a trap. And so we are less intelligent than a bird because we don't see the ensnaring traps that people give us when they're giving us the wrong advice, the wrong instruction, the wrong type of wisdom to follow. You see, a bird in this imagery that Solomon is giving us flees entrapment. A bird wants to be free. Well, we are sort of like the bird that wants freedom in Christ. And so we have to see that the bird has a sort of a bird's eye view of everything in the environment, including those who are willing to harm the bird. And so we have to be aware. We have to be so aware. And the only way to do that is through great instruction, discipline, and wisdom. And so this is what he means by the sense of the beginning of knowledge is to acknowledge the omniscience of the Lord. He's got all the wisdom. He's got the entire knowledge. Only a fool like an atheist says there's no God. There's no pride then in our intellect. So he's always telling us the beginning here of wisdom is to listen. Listen to sound advice from godly people and then pass on that advice as a godly character. And so you will then achieve this prize, the wreath, the Olympic prize of this chain pendant around your neck that says, I have the grace of God that has been given to me, and also the sense of victory in Jesus. So, again, don't gamble with your life. Don't gamble with false teaching. Don't gamble with false knowledge and wisdom. Walk in the path, the way, and that way is the only way through Christ our Lord. Don't let your feet be strayed by the wrong group, and be careful to stay on God's will. Again, avoid the idea of if it sounds too good to make easy money, if it sounds too good to be in this peer group, this gang that's going to say, well, look what we can do. Look, this fun we can have exploiting others. Then you're heading, he says, for an early grave. And isn't that an admonition to our young people today, especially? Don't follow that kind of undisciplined life. And so the whole passage then becomes a warning, not just in our daily lives, but a warning about a life of crime that would be established in their youth. So again, this is great wisdom, and I love it because it's philosophical wisdom. It's not just being puffed up with knowledge. So follow the way, the right path.